Robbie, thank you for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate you taking the time. You've got a crazy story. Can't wait to dive into that, and really grateful for you taking the time to be here. Thank you.
No problem. I'm excited.
So I'd love to start it off with quarantine. And I've heard you previously talk about a time when you were doing all the right practices, but you still weren't feeling the best you've ever felt. And I'd love for you to dive deeper into that, because I'm sure that people listening can relate. And I would love to start there.
Yeah, it's all about stimulation. And in our lives, we're chronically overstimulated. And quarantine drove that exponential. And so what do I mean by stimulation, right? So you wake up in the morning, you pick up your phone, you check your notifications, your email, your social media if you use that, your Slack messages, your newsletters. Like, it's just nonstop inundation. And then it's like, okay, I have my task list for the day, I'm going to go. And in quarantine, and, you know, preface this, I'm working on my life mission and dream with customers that I absolutely love, building something I'm super passionate about. And even when you're doing that, if you're doing too much, it's hard to be happy. And so during quarantine, some things that happened, all of a sudden I can do 12 Zoom meetings in a day. So boundaries where, you know, I drove to work or commuted, those are gone. So my time now, like back to back, I'm all of a sudden drinking coffee in the morning and just working super hard. And there's no stop point. And so I noticed the first thing, I wasn't eating properly, drinking coffee. And then in the evening, you know, so stressed, I'm ordering like shitty food on Uber Eats, which I hadn't done for years. Like I'm pretty obsessed with health and wellness. And so, you know, I'm just ordering this takeout food, which is screwing up my sleep. I'm feeling like shit the next day. And so that was a result of lack of boundaries. And then, you know, some other interesting things through quarantine. I have a physical business. And so I'm looking, like, trying to figure out the vaccines, like what's going to happen, what are the restrictions, they're changing every day, how's this impacting? I own restaurants as well. And so I'm freaking out. I'm always looking like, what the hell is going on here? And trying to figure out, like, are cases going up? Is a vaccine ready? And so all of a sudden I'm using Twitter all the time, which I also haven't used for a number of years. And so when I'm on Twitter, I'm now looking at like crypto prices and what other entrepreneurs are doing and comparing myself. And like Twitter moves so fast, right? And then two other things that happened, I was going to the gym every morning. That's my outlet, exercise. And so you're listening, like, all of a sudden you can't exercise. I hate working out at home. I'm not one to like put on some, you know, I don't know. I just not into working out at home. I find it boring. I need to be in like a class or a gym, like lifting heavy weights. I don't like doing body weight stuff. So all of a sudden I'm like not working out the same way I did. And then the final one is like hanging out in person. Like, you don't realize, you know, you're around somebody, you're talking at normal speed. If you're on the internet, you're at internet speeds. And so what does that mean? It means like I'm in Twitter, boom, browser toggle. I'm talking in 5 Slack conversations. I noticed mid-quarantine going out for dinner last summer on a patio. My sister came into town. It was the first dinner I'd been out for in a couple months. And we're talking and I'm like, keep looking to grab my phone. And it's because my brain is so used to being stimulated so quickly that I just couldn't keep a normal conversation. And so I have a ton of good practices. I use, you know, cold plunge and sauna every day. I meditate every day. I do breath work. I'm like pretty aware and have been for a long time, which we can get into. And even with all that, these things just crept up one after the other until I needed so much stimulation to feel normal. It just like every day I wasn't feeling good. And all of a sudden, like not working out, my diet's off. I'm addicted to Twitter, basically, and stimulation, having trouble having a conversation with a human. And that stuff just stacked on top of each other. And it was like, you have these dopamine pathways. And for people who struggle with addiction, you know, when you, let's say, use cocaine, the dopamine response is so strong that eventually nothing else creates a dopamine response. And so you need that just to feel normal. And so, you know, if you're watching TV, shopping, gambling, all of these things work on those same pathways, right? Looking at social media. And so when you're looking at that stuff, sorry, one second. I'm going to, hey. Yeah, sorry about that. Somebody was just walking around the house. I just
no
wanted
worries.
to, yeah. Okay. Yeah, where were we? So I was just saying with the dopamine response, what happens is everything else in your life becomes less enjoyable. And so you need to do that one thing. And if it's social media, you need to be on social media all day. And what that means is like going for a walk, sitting down and eating dinner. Like that stuff becomes less pleasant, and it's a problem. And so that happened to me to the point where I was just like, okay, life's not fun. Why is that?
It's incredible that you became aware of that. And because so many people are caught in that loop for forever and for a long period of time. And I believe that's probably due to all the practices that you've put into place. But could you recall a period in your life when you weren't acting with awareness, and what that was like, and when that switch happened, when you started to become more aware of yourself?
Yeah, it's a long pathway, probably 6-7 years now of these practices. And I mean, I don't think you need to be so aggressive with them. I think you can start really small and immediately start to feel better. And so you may have heard like, oh man, this guy's crazy. He's got a cold plunge and he's doing breath work and meditation. Like, you don't need all that. You can slowly level up and just find one piece of awareness in your day, even if it's just going for a walk or some brief exercise or 15 minutes of reading. Like, I think the big mistake is I need to start with everything versus just start like, every little marginal piece is helpful. And so in my life, I had no idea about any of these practices. And if you're like, okay, like no matter where you are, where your audience listeners are, like I had a pretty strong drug and alcohol dependency from 18 to, 28. And so for 10 years, it was just something. I have ADHD and I'm really attracted to stimulation. And so that's what I did to reset. Would be the weekend. I always worked really hard also because I kind of needed validation. I wanted to be successful. I would like get stimulated by work. And so that's how I, turned on. I'd wake up like, okay, I got all my tasks. I'm doing my tasks. I feel good. And then on the weekend, I would use drugs and alcohol to like zone out. And that was my level of awareness. And it was like, okay, well, all I really care about is making money, being successful, being admired by others. Females, especially specifically when I was like in my early 20s. And that was a time when, I knew nothing. And it led to some serious problems, right? I lost my first company that I started, not really a result of drug use, but I was in a really bad spot. And the first thing I learned about on my journey was meditation.
So 18 to 28, what happens at 28 or 29 that snaps you out of it into a different realm?
Yeah, I was just lucky. And so, one interesting thing is people fear failure, but oftentimes failure helps you grow and transition. And so, 28, the company I started when I was 24, venture-backed company, it fails. And for 2 years, I'm like uphill journey, battling, trying to make this work. And I need to lay people off. I need to take our equipment out of a data center and switch data centers. I need to deal with vendors that we can't pay. It's just, investors calling me, yelling at me, dealing with bridge loans. And so finally, after 4 years, the company fails. And so, we can no longer raise money. It's clear the business isn't working. It can't cover the costs of the infrastructure that we built. And for the 2 years leading up to hey, we're going to fail was, so frightening. And then the business fails and you're kind of, okay, I can focus on something else. And then, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, you're going to find something else you're excited about. And all of a sudden you have hope again. And I think as a human being, when you have hope, it's super powerful, right? And when you have fear, it's the exact opposite. And so when something actually failed, it was like, okay, what am I going to do next? And that was a particularly challenging time. I was living in my parents' basement. I had no money. I went to business school. And so a lot of my friends that are now, consultants and bankers, they're starting to do really well in their career. And I've been doing a startup for 4 years. I'm like, in a wrong way, thinking I don't have any skills. What am I going to do? I'm this weird generalist. And I couldn't even afford to go out for a dinner. I had to ask my parents, hey, can I borrow $60 to go out for dinner tonight with my friends? Super embarrassing considering that was such a driver for me. And so it was at that point I was like, okay, life's clearly not working. You worked so hard, massive weeks to fail and end up in this place of low self-confidence, struggling with addiction. It was kind of, I was forced into looking at maybe there's a better way.
So you knew you were going to fail for 2 years. What was that like?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. It's I think when I started this company, it was hardware in 2010 in Toronto, and like the chances for that to succeed, or looking back on it, are actually super low. There isn't really the network, there isn't the funding. Now things are different, but back then it was like you're not taking a shot that has a likelihood of success. But I didn't know that. I thought, yeah, I'm smart, I can do anything. Like, let's go, I'll figure it out. The knowing you're going to fail is like you're doing something as an entrepreneur, and there's this classic line, I think it may be attributed to Reid Hoffman, like you're jumping off a cliff and forming the plane on the way down. And so you're always kind of like, and this is one of the reasons why I quit drinking and why I think it's actually a superpower, is because you're always going to be glass full or glass half full, glass half empty. And that is really related to how you're feeling, what your state is. So if your state is super on and you feel positive, you can move things forward. If your state is off, you feel negative, you're afraid. It's much harder to move things forward and like take the risks and get rejected. And so for those last 2 years, it was really like glass 10% full, like we'd spent, I think, $20 million on building this infrastructure out. And then it just became clear the product wasn't good enough. At first it was, we were offering 90% savings on roaming, and we would give it to somebody in the US. They'd travel to the UK. We would send them a UK identity, and they would get a message saying like, you just saved $100 on this call. And it was like, oh, this is great. And then as roaming declined like 90%, which was unexpected, it was just like, wow, the value prop isn't that great. And so you had this sinking feeling of, man, we spent all this money to build this thing and we can't drive the revenues we need from the product. Like, what are we going to do? But at that stage, you can't just quit, right? And so it was just this feeling of every day, like, I don't think this is going to work, but I'm going to try anyways. And it was quite a good lesson of when you take money and like start building something, like you're in it to the end if you're the founder. And so, yeah, very, very challenging time, because every day it makes you feel like you're a failure and it's not going to work. And it goes back to what I said before about like, you need hope to build energy into your state.
It's so wild because in sports and business, no one really talks about what you do when you're down 100 to 70 in the fourth quarter with 3 minutes left. And it sounds like for your 2 years there, it sounds like you were down 170. There was an insurmountable lead that the opponent had that you couldn't possibly get to. Do you wish you had quit earlier? Do you look back at that time with a sense of appreciation because you kept working through something? What do you think?
These are really good questions. I don't think too much about this time anymore, and it just goes to show like how much growth is there. And for one, it's kind of like, okay, the way we started off put us in a hole that we couldn't get out of, and I just didn't know anything about lean. So for entrepreneurs, listening now, it's like, how can you validate your idea? And we could have used somebody else's infrastructure. We could have targeted only iPhones going just to the UK for customers in Toronto. And instead we like built something that worked in 250 countries. It worked in every phone. We hired the entire engineering team internally. We built our own billing platform. And so we just did everything internally that you could have rented, and just to prove that the product works. And so the business we do now is the exact opposite. I always try to start with like side projects, validate. And so the first thing that comes to mind is just like, if I could have done something differently, it would have been, don't spend all this money up front assuming the demand is going to be there. And even if the demand is there, by the time that you launch something, things can change. So that was like the first lesson. And the second is, great. I think it's good to understand failure and challenge, because there's not much now that I'm afraid of. And so, having gone through that, on the other side, you're going to come out of it. And so I think to some degree that, it's really interesting, because after that, I started going after these experiences that build resilience. So, dark retreat, Vipassana retreat, psychedelic medicines. I love like this hard, challenging stuff that kind of shows you who you are. So to me, in some ways, entrepreneurship is kind of a meditation. You go through these difficulties, and in those moments you see who you are. And so I wouldn't trade that actually for anything.
It's amazing. So take me through then what happens at 29. Is that the first time you start going inward and growing? Talk to me about like what happens directly after, because if someone's listening with a failure of some sort and now trying to figure out what the next step is, how did you determine what was next when the company failed?
So I was in Toronto, really kind of like, what am I going to do? And I picked up 4-Hour Work Week, and then I read 4-Hour Body, and I started listening to Tim Ferriss stuff. So he's a hero in some ways, because he got me into this morning gratitude practice, 10 minutes of meditation, morning routine. And so I stuck on to you know what? My career is not working, but I can have this morning routine and I can crush my early day. And so I kind of got into meditation there, and that was pretty helpful. And so for anybody listening, if you're really struggling, at least you can own your morning, and that's pretty common. And so the next thing I was like, okay, well, I want to change. I'm in these situations around friends where there's a lot of drugs and alcohol, and I should probably just remove myself from the situation. That's a hard look, right? And so what I did, I moved to Israel. One of the investors in our company lived there, and he said, hey, let's go invest in companies together. You can do the diligence, about hardware. And I was like, okay, well, this seems like a pretty interesting opportunity. And it's another one. If you're young and you're going to start something, take risks, don't be afraid, And so I went there. I'm not Jewish. I don't speak Hebrew. I just lived in the city on the border of Gaza. I remember the first week I moved there, there's a missile alarm because, they have this Iron Dome system when missiles are shot, an alarm goes off, and everybody in every apartment on each floor, there's a safe room. And so I see all these people going to the safe room, and what is this? And so that was crazy. So I'm thinking what am I even doing here? Nobody speaks English. I can't read. I wasn't even in Tel Aviv. I was in this small city, called Ashkelon, and it was near where we were working, near an army base, and I couldn't even read the lettering. So it's not I'd lived in Brazil before, and you can at least read on the menus and get the hang of it. And so it felt wow, this is crazy. And so when I was there, I had met someone who told me about a Vipassana retreat, and I thought, I was going to come home over Christmas, and just thought, you know what, I'll save the money, and I'm going to go over Christmas. This thing ends at New Year's, and maybe this is what I'm looking for, something different. And so I did that first 10-day retreat, and I think that started to lead to the ability to be aware.
So you do that first Vipassana retreat, and what do you find out about yourself?
I think you mentioned this before around going inward. Right. And it's sort of the first time, in what a Vipassana retreat is for people who are listening, 10 days of silence, and each day 10 hours of meditation. So very strict, rigid schedule. You're waking up at 4:30. You're meditating for stints of 1 hour to 2.5 hours with small breaks in between, and, not even eye contact with another person. And it was the first time I'd spent 100 hours, even close to that, in meditation. If you think about that, that's 2 years of calmer headspace, 10 minutes every day. And so you're comprising 2 years into a 10-day period. And so, things start to come up, right? You start to realize that you're not in control of your thoughts. And in a normal day, you wake up, you start going about your task list, you have all the things I need to do. And there's just so much hustle and bustle that getting to the level of really understanding why you're doing things is almost impossible based on how much stimulation is going on. And we talked about this at the start of the podcast. So the average person's life is I have all these things with work, my family, my kids. There's almost no time to sit and consider deeper questions. Things like, is my life going well? Am I achieving what I want to? Am I feeling the way I want to? What's not working? Most people may have 30 minutes of that level of flow state within a month. If they're not practicing, maybe, and so all of a sudden 10 hours a day for 10 days starts to come out well, why do you care so much what people think? Why is this external validation? Why is it important to be successful? And those were patterns I developed as a child because my parents were pretty strict, and I kind of got the message that, hey, do well in life, you need to be successful. And so super type A person, but never really considered, is that real? Is that going to make you happy? And so all of a sudden I'm starting to think about these things more deeply. And it was the first time I understood that, when you're overwhelmed, you can go inward.
And was it during that retreat when you figured out that a lot of the reasons why you did things was because you were bullied when you were 5 years old, or because when you were 14, someone was smoking and you said, oh, that would be cool, I need to smoke as well? Did all those realizations come in that first session, that first 10-day retreat?
Some through that. I think what you realize in the Vipassana at the end of the day is that you have no control over your thoughts and emotions. Like your mind is basically a wild animal. And before that, you have the sensation that like, yeah, I'm in control of my day. I have free will. I know what I'm doing. And the fact is you don't. And so that's the first time within, you know, you experientially know that emotions and thoughts just arise. And so that in itself is pretty powerful, because then you can get some space. And so if you're always dominated by your thoughts, which is like 99.9% of people in North America, having the ability to have some space between what's coming up and your reaction is huge. And so just understanding that like, hey, there's this thing called presence that's kind of beyond my thinking mind that I can tap into was amazing. It made me feel like, wow, you know, like there are options, there are things here that I can grow. And it was sort of this like first ray of hope that, hey, there's something here that can make me feel better.
What did you do next? You come home from the Vipassana retreat. Did you put meditation aside altogether? Did you continue your practice? What was the next step for you?
Yeah, I continued my practice until now, pretty much. After Vipassana, they recommend 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the evening, and I've never been able to maintain that. And so many people can. For me, like, just way too challenging. I would always do it. I've done a couple of Vipassanas and I've served two also, and I always like come back enthusiastic and like ready, but it fades as you deal with normal life. And so, you know, now I keep to sort of a 20 minutes a day mindfulness practice when I'm less busy a bit more, but that's sort of, it's not even, I wouldn't say a goal because I'm not as attached. It's more just, you know, 20 minutes seems to be what happens regularly. But after that Vipassana, I actually learned about psychedelic medicines. My roommate there just said, hey, you know, if you're interested in this, like, do you want to come try LSD? And so I find myself a couple of weeks later driving up to this university campus, 4 a.m. The idea was to take LSD and watch the sunrise. We go out into the woods, you know, take the LSD, and I'm with these 3 people. They all speak Hebrew. One speaks like barely English. And again, I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, I'm in the woods. Like, this is crazy. And obviously have what was my first sort of more intentional psychedelic medicine experience. And it was really cool. I wrote an article about it. We could probably put it in the show notes. And then from there, that kind of got me into like, okay, there's some power with psychedelic medicine. So I did a ton of research, learned about ayahuasca, and about 6 months after that Vipassana, flew to flew to Peru and did 4 ayahuasca sessions in the jungle. And I think that's when a lot of change started to happen.
Okay, I want to get into that. But first, I want to ask about the connection between meditation and psychedelics. Something that I've experienced is when I did 60 minutes of 60 days worth of meditation. This is like Naval's challenge, and this was big for me. It unlocked a lot of insights, and I felt connected to nature and really felt kinder to myself and others for maybe the first time in my life. And this was last year. And I talked to a buddy of mine who was doing LSD or psilocybin, not sure which one, but he reported very similar findings. And I said, that's interesting that psychedelics and meditation could have the same impact for 2 different people. And I'm curious if you found that to be the case as well. And if you have, why you think that is.
Yeah. So scientifically, they're both shutting down the same part of your brain. And this is simplifying it quite a bit, but you have something called the default mode network. And when they do brain scans of advanced meditators and psychedelic use, they find this part of the brain to be less active. And this is the part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, that creates the identity, the thinking mind that's thinking about the past and future, that then makes you feel like an individual. And so, you know, it's, I'm not good enough. What do these people think of me? Yeah, I'm the funny person. You have all these like conceptions, these programs your brain has stored based on your experience to avoid failure and rejection and these difficult things that have happened in the past. Your brain's saying like, hey, I don't want to feel that way again, avoid them. And as a result, you know, your mind is just going and going. And so both psychedelic medicines and meditation shut down that part of your brain and allow for new connections. And so an interesting metaphor you may have heard in Michael Pollan's book is like, imagine a ski hill and you're just skiing down in the same tracks every day. It then becomes almost impossible to avoid those tracks. psychedelics and meditation are both like a snowfall that allows for new neural connections and behavior change. And so I just find both of them soften the eye. Okay, well, what happens if you soften the eye? You move into the parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system, where there's more connection with belonging, with meaning. There's more of a experiential feeling that like people are all the same. And as a result, just these like feelings of love. There's also with psychedelics, I find the processing, it also happens with breath work, but the processing of stored trauma and energy. And it just, I find, really helps to regulate the nervous system and our nervous system response to stress. And so it just feels like all these old emotions are coming up, being processed and released. And as a result, you just feel like significantly better afterwards.
Yeah, that was a brilliant explanation. Could you go into the ayahuasca trips or experiences and why those were so powerful for you?
Yeah, for sure. And then keep in mind for people listening, it doesn't have to be, ayahuasca is like quite a scary thing. It's not super accessible. It requires going on retreat. It requires, for the most part, going into the deep jungle. It can be quite challenging, can make you very ill. So it's hard. And so a lot of people are afraid. And, if you are afraid, there are many other options. There's like legal ketamine therapy, which is a great starting point. Psilocybin is another amazing substance. Again, not suggesting using illegal drugs, but it is an amazing substance. So, if your ayahuasca is not the be all and end all, I wouldn't even say it's the starting point. And then breath work is another modality where you can get a lot of these similar benefits in a more accessible way to sort of prep. But for the ayahuasca specifically, for me, it was a pretty intense experience. We, landed, and this is 5.5 years ago now. And so it's, this is pretty new. It's not talked about. There's no How to Change Your Mind. There's no Tim Ferriss and everybody like out in public talking about this stuff. And so a friend of mine and myself found this website and went. And I'll tell you a super funny story, but we get there and you take like a canoe almost into the deep Amazon. We're thinking again, like, why am I here? This is crazy. And, we pull up and it's all huts that are like stilted with like mosquito nets. And it's like in the jungle. And we go to do the first morning and it's this thing called Cambo. And it's a kind of like an injection of a venom that comes from toads. And it's used to purify the body, but it's somewhat maybe a poison, but used to purify the body, helps to build the immune system. Hunters use it in the Amazon since like the beginning of time. And we're going around in a circle. Everyone's doing this. And, they take a piece of like kind of like a sharpened stick, like a stick poke tattoo, and they poke a couple holes in your skin and they put this venom into the holes. And so you're watching everyone in the circle go around, get sick, like one after the other. And it comes my turn and I do it. And sometimes you have a very strong reaction and my body goes into a seizure. I go somewhere else, don't know where I am. I wake up being like, oh, like moaning. And my friend, who I also kind of dragged there, he was going next. And he's like white as a ghost, like looking at me like, holy shit. Because like, yeah, it's your turn next, man. He sees this happen. So it was pretty funny. It was like a pretty hardcore experience. The ayahuasca itself was really challenging for me. I've seen often when people struggling with addiction really struggle to let go. It's almost like it rips the addiction right out of you and like resets the neurotransmitters so you don't have those impulses for a period of time after, but you're like fighting with it. You don't want to let go. You don't want to surrender. And each night, 4 nights of medicine work, more difficult than the last. And it's kind of a mixture. There's like beautiful times where you just feel connected, loved, like life is amazing, like just in your deepest soul feeling that you're accepted and okay as you are with no demands. And so in your normal state, it's almost impossible to feel that way. Like normally you get up and you're back in your thought patterns, which tend to skew slightly negative for most people, which is why we have depression and all these mental health problems. And so this takes you to a state of complete acceptance. It really allows you to move past, like, I should be this, to I'm accepted. And so that's kind of what I learned through this. I went through, like, you know, you mentioned two things that I've talked about on other podcasts. One was this moment of like why I was even using drugs and alcohol in the first place, which was really powerful to see that it was something that I thought was cool and rebellious, and to kind of let that go as, you know, I'm older now. Why is that still important? And the other was just early emotions where I was afraid of like failure, rejection, to see those, process them, let them go. And so I don't think it's a silver bullet. I've actually found, just like any of these peak experiences, they last for a while, and as you come back into life, they fade. And so it's really on you to use that time, whether it's with professional psychologists, group, community, to make the changes you need in that window when the brain is pliable. And so for me, it was coming back from that retreat, and I felt amazing for 6 months, and I started to implement all kinds of new habits. But so I think if you're listening and you're like, yeah, I really want to shut down my mind. I want to feel what it's like to be whole. I want to let go of some of these emotions from the past. I want to make change in my life. And you don't have a history of psychosis. Definitely, I would suggest looking more into psychedelic medicines. It's like the efficacy they're showing for some of the early studies with psychedelics for like smoking cessation, depression, MDMA for PTSD, couples therapy are like off the charts efficacy and safety wise. So I really believe in a world over the next 10 years where everybody will be using these substances at one point or another in their lives.
Take me through what that conversation was like when you and your friend are coming back into the world. What are the things you're talking about? What do you say to each other? Did you guys both have profound experiences?
Yeah, I mean, he's actually going to be the MC at my wedding next month. And it was pretty funny because just so coincidental. But so, you know, you finish these experiences and at some points you feel like you're dying. Like there is literally, and I've done ayahuasca now, I don't know, over 10 times, and a lot of other psychedelic work. I don't use it too much anymore. Maybe once, twice a year as I feel I need, we'll go for a deep dive. But there's moments for anybody who knows this when you like I would cut off my arm to make it end, because you're trapped in like a fear from childhood that is repressed, that you're going through, that was so hard you couldn't deal with it at the time. You know, a parent yelling at you, a car accident, some type of rejection. And so you go through that together. It's like there's nothing in my mind that bonds people together like shared struggle, right? And so you're facing like immediate transformation together, and you're there for each other, and you're sharing in this circle. And so as a way to bond as friends, it's something that's like unforgettable. And I've done it now with a few other retreats with other friends, and there's just something special about sharing these experiences together, where some people I've met and we've done one experience, and if I saw them on the road, we would like stop and like crack jokes. Like, you remember each experience is very significant. It's not like, you know, you go to a basketball game, you've seen 1,000 basketball games, you can't remember the difference. You go out to a bar, a restaurant, they're not distinct. Whereas every psychedelic medicine experience, I can remember specific visuals and things that happened. And so we just went through this thing together, which, you know, there's a really interesting study out of Johns Hopkins where people rate psilocybin as a top 5 moment in their life. Like the majority of people who use it on par with, you know, getting married, birth of a child. Like, that's how impactful this makes you feel. And so you do this 4 times. Ayahuasca is, to me, more challenging than these others in the jungle. It's like you're almost bonding your souls in a way. And so we're coming back, and, you know, my goal of that was to break my addiction, which I did. And I've never used alcohol or cocaine since then. And I just felt amazing. No phone, in the sunshine. It's like I went through, you know, I think I was like 30 at the time. 30-ish at the time, and went through all these traumas that I built up my entire life and like let them go. And it's so interesting because my friend who was co-founder of Polychain Capital, and now one of the largest crypto investors in the world, at the time he was just getting started. He was like, hey man, I invested in this ETH thing. Like, you should come out to San Francisco and check it out. And it's like, I think Ethereum was like $6 at the time. And I was like, what is this thing? And I, you know, because I went with him on that tour, I just went. I went to San Francisco and I got involved in the ecosystem, and he was the one who got me involved. And so that was the conversation, like literally on the boat ride home. Like, what am I going to do next? And that's what happens, you know, and just partly luck, right?
Do you think that this work was guiding you in some way to Ethereum, to your next venture? I mean, it's so crazy what happens when you go inward. It seems like the universe unfolds in a way that you couldn't have predicted before if you had not gone inward. Does that make sense? And what's your take as someone who's really gone deep inward?
Yeah, my take is like, you never know. You can't predict anything. And like, just for me, I'm more prone to risk. You know, I love extreme sports. I was always somebody I'm happy to be like an early adopter of something and try it. And if it's hard, like, yeah, let's go. You know, I'm a bit crazy like that. And so when I started school, it was like, oh, I got to be an investment banker. I want to be this finance guy. I'm reading all these finance texts. And it was like startups, have to do a startup. And then all of a sudden I'm living in Israel and like, I want to be a meditator. And then, you know, the psychedelic stuff. And then all of a sudden I'm in crypto for 4 years and I want to build a crypto company. And then, you know, the next thing I know, I have a wellness center in my garage and a breathwork platform. And so I just think you just let yourself evolve. If for people listening, a really interesting answer to your question is in this book, The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer. Almost so crazy that it's not believable, but his whole life as an advanced meditator was just about like letting go and letting things be pulled out of him. And if you've ever surfed or kite surfed, you can feel it like when you're really fighting what you're supposed to be doing, holding, grasping, like it leads to anxiety. And then, you know, the Zen methodology is letting go. And so when you're surfing, you catch the wave. When you're kiting, and these are bad examples because probably most people don't do those things, but it's like when you're in that state of flow, you're in this non-attachment, letting go state. And it just seems life flows. And so all the goodness in my life wasn't something I like planned, you know, and like grasped and like made happen. It just sort of has evolved. And the more I can let go into these things and surround myself with good people and like follow my heart, which again, as a banker and like, you know, engineer and finance person, it's like super weird to hear that. But yeah, like the more I follow my feelings of what I want to do, the more it seems to turn out.
The Surrender Experiment by Michael Singer's incredible book. I highly recommend everyone check that out. And it seems like from listening to your story and researching that you're following a very similar format for your own life, because the way in which Inward, your breathing company, got set up is so similar to just the chance of life and how things develop. Take me through and take us through the story of the origin of your breathing company and how it sounds like also that the transformations and the connections that people have made is very similar to psychedelic experiences. So I'm curious if you've thought about that as a connection.
Yeah, it's so great. It's so crazy how this has happened. I could never have imagined this. Like, I'm still like blown away. So I'm at Ethereum and like, you know, obviously like love what I'm doing for the first time. I'm like successful. The ecosystem is growing. I'm meeting all my tech heroes. I'm living in San Francisco. I'm living in Berlin. I'm back in Toronto. I'm with my fiance who I met after the ayahuasca. My life is going amazing. For the first time, I feel confident. I don't feel like a failure anymore. I feel like I have something to contribute. I'm feeling good. And I'm trying to teach people about psychedelics and meditation. Like both of these things, you know, I have my daily practice and I have my twice a year psychedelic deep dives. And it's really helping me to just have integrity in my decisions, you know, to like have a solid routine, to like treat people well, to like do good at work, to not be the person I was before or like avoid those tendencies. And I'm just feeling great. So I'm like, oh, I want to teach people about this. And so I'm leading like meditation classes for our team. I'm telling all my friends, I'm writing about my experiences. I'm sending people on psychedelic medicine retreats. And I just see all my efforts, like to be blunt, fail. And so out of 200 of my friends, you know, they're not spiritual. A lot of them, as I said, are like tech people and bankers, and they just don't give a shit. They're like, look, I don't have time. I'm doing this meditation thing. Nothing's happening. I tried it. I use Calm. It's not for me. And for the people it works for, the best tool out there. Incredible. It's just for most of my friends, it didn't work. And then the ones I sent to do psychedelic medicines, they had these amazing experiences, but then came back and had no wrapper, no community, no daily practice. And so what they learned over 6 weeks faded. And so I think if you have nervous system dysregulation, like PTSD, depression, yes, in psychedelic work, you can repair that nervous system dysregulation. But most of my friends are, you know, standard person listening, overwhelmed, stressed, 30 to 40-year-old just trying to figure out life. And so they had a beautiful experience, come back, and are still, drugs or alcohol or career stress, relationship stress, whatever it was, the behavioral change didn't stick. So I saw that happening and was like, man, and why isn't this stuff working? And why did it work for me? Like, why was I able to make change? And at the same time, I was always going to bathhouses. I love the bathhouse. And for those listening, like, what is that? And it's, a combination of a sauna and an ice bath. A lot of times there's like a restaurant. Sometimes it's based on Russian or Eastern European heritage. Sometimes it's like a spa, thermal spa. And I would just feel amazing. I would go to this sort of like underground spot in San Francisco called Archimedes, super hot sauna, like really cold ice bath. And legit, we'd bring 40 people there. We'd be at a conference and we'd all be like, let's go to the bathhouse. And such great social experiences, right? And I'm like obsessed with this because I don't drink. So I'm always looking like, what is a better social experience than a bar? I fucking hate bars. And we're finding like, hey man, these places like aren't even clean. No one's on their phone. And like the next day you feel amazing. It was like, whoa, like we really got deep in our conversation. Like, why is that? And it's because you go to a restaurant, everyone's got their phone. So you check your phone once every 10 minutes and there's 6 of you. Nobody's fully present all the time. You go into a sauna, it's like hot, you have no clothes on, just a towel and a bathing suit. And you're like your base self. Doesn't matter what you look like. No one's wearing makeup. It's just, chatting. And then it also does something physiologically, which improves vulnerability, which I'll talk about. But so love the bathhouse. Long story short, we built an ice bath in my backyard. I'd done the Wim Hof training, like amazing, super love breath work. And so for an entire summer, I just invited neighbors, friends every night for an ice bath. And we start adding stuff to it. So essential oil, sound bowls, all these different like hypnosis scripts, teaching people how to kind of meditate in a 4-minute ice bath. And for the first time, seeing people like it working, 45-year-old lawyer doesn't care about any of this stuff. You put them in the ice bath and they're going to become present. And so your body feels it's in danger. It triples the norepinephrine in the brain, which is a neurotransmitter responsible for mood, attention, vigilance. So you feel like I'm here, I'm present. Guess what? To-do lists, stresses, the thinking mind, we've talked about a bunch of times today, stimulation, gone, fades away. Works every time for any person. You don't need any practice or skill. You get in and we teach you how to command your breath to deal with stress. So like stress is coming up, you're in that fight or flight state, and through long, deep, slow breathing, you learn to relax your state. And so we start teaching people like when they're stressed, how to relax their state in the moment. And we start realizing it just is like carrying into life. So people that are coming every day are like, you know what? I'm less angry. I'm less stressed. When these emotions are coming up, I'm controlling my breath. They're like, holy shit, this is crazy. And then, so it starts to become winter. We're like, what are we going to do? So just randomly, we convert my garage into an underground wellness space. We use Mind-Body platform, put it up, no permit. So, if anyone's listening from the Toronto government, just ignore that. But so we put it up online and just test it. Like, and this is what I went back to with my tech experience. I was like, okay, what's the MVP? So ice bath in the backyard, can't get any easier than that. Next thing, it's a garage with a sauna and an ice bath and a website. And within 1 month, we're doing 20, 30 people a day. And the little side business is doing like 20 grand in sales. And so we're like, holy shit, this is amazing. And so we start doing all these awesome classes, and just through like being there every night, feeling into it, because I personally love the sauna and ice bath. And so, we're in the sauna and we're like, I wonder if we made it complete dark and guided a breath work in it and then did like a self-hypnosis script, what would happen? Or I wonder if like we tell everyone to bring up what they're afraid of and feel them like sweat it out, what would happen? Or like, I wonder if we do ice bath with partners where they do an eye gaze because they're so present, is that going to unlock anything? And we start testing this stuff for months, and people like go insane. They meet and go insane in a good way. So, 2 people meet in the sauna, all of a sudden they're dating. 2 people meet in the ice bath and they go on a ski trip to Whistler. We're just like, people are showing up and just hanging out for hours to like become real friends. And the community grows to a couple thousand people. Wow. And this is like a side project, right? And so I'm like, okay, something like is happening here. And I have people calling me like, yo, man, I broke my addiction. I feel good. I feel connected. I feel meaning in my life. This is the first time I feel like there's a community here for me. And so I started getting like pretty emotional. Like, this is awesome. At the same time, we were doing breath work combined with all this stuff. And so, during COVID, we have to close. It's kind of like, okay, well, this sucks. Maybe we'll just do the breath work online. And so we start doing Zoom classes, and like 20 people, 40 people, 80 people, 200 people, okay, this is cool. And people were like, oh, I want the recording, like put it on YouTube. So we're getting YouTube views. And then they're like, oh, can you make one for sleep or, for COVID anxiety or for fear? And I kind of took a whole bunch of breathwork training courses, read like every single research paper, and found out like, holy shit, this is actually the fourth pillar of health. It's the same value to the body as sleep, diet, and exercise. And so I'm like, okay, well, this is amazing. Why isn't there, I read this book by James Nestor called Breath, which is like the best starting point if you're looking to learn more. It's sort of a history of how we breathe and how our breathing patterns have changed due to, again, overstimulation and processed food. And as a result, like 90% of people are poorly breathing. So you think like, the one thing you can do, like you're breathing, if you go a few minutes without air, you're going to die. Like it's so important to how you absorb oxygen in the cells and brain. Like, 3 minutes of hyperventilation, breathing poorly can impact your focus significantly. So it's just, it's something that's not talked about a lot. So I read that book, got blown away. He's linking to just YouTube videos. I was like, wow, like why isn't there a great resource with just like hundreds of like beautiful breathwork classes? And so one kind of like unique thing we started making custom DJ'd sets. And so my partner is a musician and DJ, super artistic. And, for fun, it's again, like, if you're an entrepreneur listening, it's like kind of scratch your own itch. So Friday nights, I don't drink. So we'd have friends over and we would just put on a DJ set and we would just take turns guiding a breathwork and be like, whoa, this is insane to do socially. It gives you the same elevated feeling, of alcohol, except it's healthy. And so we started just making those and putting out like, the idea was what if meditation was like a fitness class? And so it's not meant to say, hey, like you're going to get to enlightenment. It's just like, hey, here's this really awesome practice. It's going to make you feel amazing, and it's going to be fun. And so like, why couldn't meditation be fun? And so, fast forward 6 months, we've grown to over 1,000 customers. We have a 400 class breathwork library, which we're continuing. We actually just raised VC funding to build an app. And so now I'm like, holy shit, I'm building this physical space. We signed a lease like heart of COVID. Physical space is a 45-person sauna, 4 ice baths, and a tea room. And the idea is you have classes from like 5 to 8 p.m. So breathwork in the sauna, sound bath in the sauna, and then 8 p.m. to 1 a.m. it's a bar. And so you have really like nice music, but there's just no alcohol. And so it's like, you come back from your psychedelic retreat, all of a sudden you have your friends who are interested in like meditation and psychedelics and all entrepreneurship and health and longevity and all these like subcultures that are coming together. And so in my mind, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm building these physical spaces, this network to provide people with meaning, friendships, the ability to transform, and then a mobile app they can use to actually be mindful day in, day out. That's easier than meditation. And now it's like, wow, we actually built this system that's like changing lives, making people feel happy again. And I'm watching it happen. People who, and again, like right now we're in a garage in a course platform and we're expecting to launch the new space in November and the app in September. But I'm watching even with this, like people having breakthroughs and like calling me. And I just, when that started happening, I quit my job at Ethereum to just do this full time because it's what saved my life and what changed my life and got me sober and like happy and found my partner. And so I feel like making this stuff accessible is like is going to help millions of people.
It's just amazing what you're doing and how you're going about it. One thing that sticks out is the fact that it's so common to go out on a Friday or Saturday night, but it's not common to go in and go inward. And I think you're normalizing that, the practice of going inward and creating a community around it. And that is so, so powerful, because why do we drink alcohol on a Friday and Saturday night? Why don't we meditate on a Friday and Saturday night? Why isn't that common practice? And it's like, what would the world look like if it was common for people to go out by meditating on Friday and Saturday? And I think that's what you're helping create. And that is so, so powerful. So I just wanted to take a second to say thank you for pushing the movement forward from that respect.
Yeah, thanks. And I just think to respond to that, there's a lot of people, you got to meet people where they are. And so it doesn't have to be spiritual or energies or, strict or like discipline or a chore. It's kind of like, okay, well, let's just make something fun that's going to help people get out of their minds and into their bodies and feel good. And like, okay, great. Like, yeah, maybe somebody's not going to go to a 1-hour meditation class on a Friday night because it's daunting. But if they're going to go to a Soho House aesthetic sauna to see a crazy performance because it's cool, and then maybe they learn a little bit about, you know, some meditation sprinkled in there, great. Like, what is the onboarding? And that's what I'm like really trying to solve, because I just have seen like hundreds of friends struggling, but like, what is the steps to get them into this world of presence, meditation, psychedelic medicines? Because those two things, they're not the best first step. And so I think once that funnel opens up, there's just millions of people are going to move into this lifestyle.
Yeah, and it reminds me of crypto too, because Coinbase took something that was difficult for a lot of people, buying crypto for the first time, and they made it easy and accessible for a lot more people to use. And it sounds like, from my perspective, that you're doing something similar by making meditation or breath work easy to use, and it's not a big step for someone to do for the first time. So is there any connection there that you note, or you've seen from your days in crypto to now onboarding people into the world of breath work and going inward?
For sure. I don't think that's a great analogy. It's exactly like that. It's like, it's not crypto related. It's just, what is the first step to get people somewhere? And it was just like a ton of guess and testing. And so you don't really see in North America spas being used communally for social, right? So it's like, primarily, you go to a float studio, you go on your own, you know, you go to a spa, it's like silent. There wasn't this idea like, whoa, what's a sauna class? That's insane. Like, I've never even heard of that before. And, you know, we kind of pioneered that. It was just through testing. Like, what do people like? You know, what's the first thing? And we just kind of, if you're an entrepreneur, it's why side projects work, because you don't really know what you're building, but you find the root of like what it is people want. And then usually there's like something bigger behind that, right? So the ideas aren't really obvious. The first idea was like, oh, well, we're going to do an ice bath because it's good for longevity. And then it was like, oh, well, wait a minute, this is actually like a meditation technique. And then it was like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually a social thing. And then it was like, okay, well, wait a minute, this is not just a social thing. It's a way to make behavior change and inspire people. And like, oh, they want to do breath work too. And like, oh, they'd have an app. And so, you know, it's kind of just putting the thing out there and watching what works, and then leading people further and further down the funnel.
Very cool. Before I let you go, I got to ask you about something that is a personal question, because when I go to sleep, I have a very difficult time shutting off my mind. I'm sure a lot of people listening as well. It's like the mind is running and running and running. And I'm curious if are any particular breath works that are beneficial to do before sleep.
Yeah, 100%. So when you're breathing in, you're increasing your heart rate, you're boosting energy. And so you mentioned before we talked, I did this energizing breath work. And so if you're really focused on like breathing in big, huge breaths, you're going to turn on the fight or flight system, the energizing system. The opposite of that is moving into what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest. It's when we send blood flow to the organs, when we're in a state of relaxation. In that state, we trigger feelings of like meaning, love, oxytocin. It happens when we give someone a hug, when we look someone in the eyes. And so that's the state we want to be in before bed. And so you can physiologically move yourself into that state within 5 minutes. So we have a whole unwind section using different styles of breath work. General styles of breath work that move you into that state are where you extend the exhale longer than the inhale, and you include some type of retention. So holding your breath is actually a much better way to relax than taking a big inhale, which you hear a lot of like therapists used to be the common, okay, you want to relax, like big inhale. It's actually better to lengthen the exhale and have some type of retention. And so a number of styles of breathing that work well. Box breath is one, which is like in 4, hold 4, out 4, hold 4. And that's why it's called box breath. Another is a form of breathing called coherent breathing, which is breathing in sync with your heart rate. Traditionally, it's inhale 6, exhale 6, but it differs slightly per person. And then another is just doing breath holds. So, you know, in 4, out 4, in 4, out 4, hold 20, and then continuing that pattern. What you're trying to do is engage the parasympathetic nerves, which are in the bottom of the lungs, long, slow exhales. And so we have a whole section on unwinding and sleep to help with this exact thing, to shift your physiology before bed.
Awesome. I will certainly be replaying that section and taking note of that and doing it before bed. Thank you, Robbie, for breaking that down. My final question is, what advice do you have for someone who is pursuing the highest version of themselves, whether that's physically, mentally, spiritually? It seems like you have a lot of experience in that arena, or all those arenas. So I would love to know what your advice is to that person specifically.
Yeah, I think I would just suggest to start small and not get overwhelmed. And so for me, it was just like the first step was, through Tim Ferriss, building a morning routine. It was 4 things I'm grateful for in a 5-minute meditation. And like, that was helpful. And so, you don't have to, you hear a lot of people come on these podcasts and they're like, oh, I have my 4-hour morning routine. I only eat like low carb foods. I work out 5 times a week. You can get stuck. And I've done this. I've been, measuring every calorie, like keeping notes about everything that I'm working on. My tracker has like 15 things I'm doing, and then there's no space. And so for me, it's just like, be kind to yourself and implement things slowly. Find one thing that works for you. And if it's small, like, be kind to yourself. I think I'll leave you with this idea for people that are listening, that it used to be cool to like be working on yourself. So I need to achieve, I need to be better, I need to train. And it's sort of the motto of a lot of these places like CrossFit and SoulCycle. And, it's like achievement based. And I think what we're moving into now, it's the fact, it's just this realization that you're actually okay. And it's kind of going back to, who am I? Who's my inner child, my inner self, my authentic self? And it's finding like, who are you? And just accepting that. And any practice that helps you accept that you're already amazing and like really feel that. And that's what I think meditation and psychedelics are doing, is going beyond these thinking patterns to feel like, yeah, you are lovable. You are okay. Right. So any practice, I think, that just helps you come back to who you are is beautiful, versus like, I have to strive to be better.
That's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Robbie, for taking the time. Where can people find you and connect with you further?
Yeah, so inwardbreathwork.com. There's an awesome free trial. I would highly suggest you test like 3 or 4 of the breathwork sessions. They're amazing. If you love physical fitness but have never been able to get into meditation, or have always struggled with meditation, like, test some of our classes, because they're meant to be engaging and like change your state. So that's one, is like, check our breathwork platform, try it out. Super fun. Really proud of it. Each one's like a little work of art. And then you can follow me on Twitter at Robbie Bent 1. And so I generally build in public and share everything we're working on, or strategy, or brand, all this kind of stuff. And then we have physical space if you're in Toronto as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. We'll link all those below.
Thanks, Danny.